Educational distribution of this program sponsored by Vulcan Materials Company. The sky opens and raindrops drench a lofty Blue Ridge mountain peak. A river is born. The exact date is lost in time, but it was possibly 200 million years ago that these waters started flowing, unfathomable by our perception of time, and yet the river may still be in its infancy. If we listen and watch closely, we'll better understand the story it tells. This is the Yadkin, born of cool mountain springs in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. It begins as a sprightly stream cascading through Blackberry Ridge. It will later become a robust river as it gathers strength from creeks in the Piedmont and eventually matures, its name changing to the PD by the time it lumbers across the coastal plain. At Georgetown, South Carolina, it makes an Atlantic Ocean rendezvous with the waters from other rivers. It forms the second largest river system on the East Coast, covering 18,000 square miles and containing nearly 6,000 miles of streams. As with many rivers, we take it for granted. We catch a glimpse from a bridge. The Yadkin is a quiet, unassuming river, but it plays a vital role in our lives. It provides scenic and recreation areas, nourishes economic growth, supplies electricity and drinking water, and serves as the life's blood for more than 2 million people and countless plants and animals. The Yadkin has literally shaped the landscape. What we see now is a mere snapshot in geologic time, but through the years, it's washed away once mighty mountains, as high as any in the world today. It's still at work, changing mountains into the rolling hills of the Piedmont, and in the process, it's building up the coastal plain. Archaeologists say the first Americans arrived on the river 9,000 to 12,000 years ago. Eventually, they would name it the Yadkin, meaning place of the big trees.
By 1200 AD, let's say 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago, if you'd been floating down the Yadkin River in a canoe, you'd never be out of sight of the smoke from their villages. You'd never be out of earshot of people shrieking and splashing in the river and calling to their kids and that sort of thing. So it was a very busy area.
They planted corn and sunflowers, trapped fish in the river, and along its banks they hunted deer and wild turkey. They made cooking vessels from clay they found nearby.
They would make small vessels like this, perhaps for some very restricted use, and then more commonly they were making these very large vessels like this one, which you can see would hold probably 2, maybe 4 gallons. This would be the cooking pot, serving, say, a household of 6 to 10 people. Everyone eating communally from a vessel like this. And from the size of these vessels, we're able to at least make an educated guess at the size of the family. That coupled with the size of the houses that we have found. So you're probably talking about a village, a typical village, maybe 30 people.
Then these villages disappeared. The first adventurers from Europe landed on the coastal shore 280 miles away in the late 1500s. They brought deadly diseases, typhus, measles, and smallpox. The Native Americans had no immunity, so entire villages could have been wiped out in just a few days' time. When the first settlers arrived here around 1750, they found virtually no one home. The Moravians in their journals tell us small groups of Indians from the mountains would occasionally pass through their settlements and maybe even ask for food. The visits were peaceful, but forts were soon built for protection, and groups of rangers were formed to range the frontier, putting down uprisings during what the settlers here called the Cherokee Wars. A few farmhouses were attacked, and 15 settlers in the area were killed. By 1763, it was over, and the Indians relinquished their Yadkin Valley. Jim Daniel enjoys reenacting the lifestyle of those pioneers on the Yadkin frontier.
They were almost all small farmers. You had transportation problems. The rivers could not be used as transportation because they're fairly shallow, they're rocky, and you have numerous waterfalls here in the coast. So goods that were carried out of here had to be carried over roads. The roads were poor. They couldn't compete with the farmers in the east of the state as far as selling their own goods. So they basically just grew what they could consume themselves.
Daniel Boone knew this river valley well. For 13 years, he lived in what's now Davie County. Found himself a wife there in 1756. He once said the forest along the Yadkin was the best hunting place he knew. There, it was said, Daniel and a good hunting friend could kill 30 deer in a day. But wanderlust took him away. He followed the river into the mountains and blazed a trail over the imposing Appalachians into the land of Kentucky. The 1770s saw a tremendous movement of immigrants through this Yadkin River Valley. Settlers looking for cheap land were pouring down the interstate highway of the day, which ran from Pennsylvania to Georgia. Many crossed the Yadkin at a place called Shallow Ford between Forsyth and Yadkin County. Only a couple of feet below the water's surface is a relatively smooth rock bottom stretching from shore to shore.
The Shallow Ford was the ford on the Yadkin on what was called the Great Wagon Road. And the most common name for the wagon road was the Bad Road. It was the only ford within 30 miles where you could cross the river. A natural place for a road to come to, and had been for thousands of years with the buffalo and the deer and the Indians after them. It was a natural funnel right to this spot.
And it was at this spot in February of 1781 that General Cornwallis and his British soldiers crossed the Yadkin while in hot pursuit of General Nathaniel Greene. Witnesses said the line of redcoats stretched 15 miles. 5 weeks later, the British won a costly victory at Guilford Courthouse, but they were soon defeated at Yorktown, and the Revolutionary War, which had divided neighbor against neighbor, was over. Phenomenal growth followed. By one estimate, in the early 1800s, 1/3 of the state's people lived in the Yadkin Valley. Iron forges and grist mills were constructed along the river, but attempts to build canals and make the Yadkin navigable from Wilkesboro to the sea failed. Finally, railroads were built, giving those in the Piedmont an efficient way to move their goods to market. When Thomas Edison and other investors built Idle's Dam on the Yadkin in 1898, providing the first hydroelectric power in the state, the river was harnessed and a boom town was created. By tapping that energy, Winston-Salem grew to be the largest city in North Carolina in the 1920s. Wake Forest University biology professor Peter Weichel says today humans control the river's destiny.
Yes, right now, particularly, they're very much in control of the river. They can use it well and take care of the river and therefore ensure its long-term beauty, value, if you will, both recreational and economic, and also the long-term aspect in terms of the growth of the region. If the river's in good shape, it will support the cities or the towns along it. If it is destroyed, then the economic growth in these areas is going to be curtailed severely.
Those in charge of keeping the Yadkin clean say it's actually in better shape than it was 20 years ago, largely because industries are dumping less pollution. But Larry Coble with the North Carolina Division of Environmental Management says he's not sure the current government regulations will be enough.
Probably there is adequate regulation on the book for what's going on now, but tomorrow somebody may come up with some new use of the river or something that is not regulated. If the world maintained its natural state, then there wouldn't be any pollution. We wouldn't have to worry about it. But people cause pollution. And the more people that come into this very attractive area of Winston-Salem and upstream of Winston-Salem are going to have an effect on the river.
Farmers have often felt the bite of government regulations. Today's farmers, with their modern equipment, can produce vastly more produce from this rich bottomland than the Indians did, but good farming techniques are essential in keeping that soil where it is. The Yadkin was once as clear as any mountain stream, but because of man's activities, it now has a muddy color.
Well, farmers have some of the burden, but they don't share it alone. The logging industry, development, once land is cleared for whatever reason, the soil washes away, sand, silt, clay, the sand drops out first because it's the heaviest. the silt and clay go into the river, and the clay is in suspension. So when you hear that the river is muddy, there's no such thing. It's clayey.
I believe that most of us as farmers are probably more sensitive to the environment and the runoff that comes from us than others. We're primarily concerned in keeping our own land healthy, just like you would your own child. Our goal ultimately is to make a living off of it.
Now, if everyone had been conservation-minded like the Taylor family has, we wouldn't have had government regulation. But see, they have done strip cropping, contour farming, grass waterways, grassed and treed steeper slopes. So they have done conservation.
On this farm, a modern drip irrigation system preserves the land and the water.
The best conservation is put the world in grass or trees. However, you know, we've got to eat as a public, and the farmer has to make a living. So we've got to strike that economic balance between productivity and conservation. And the public will have to respond by being agreeable to pay higher food prices. If Mark is going to be able to produce millions of pounds of food very cheaply, then we have to strike that economic balance for him also, because the regulations do cost him money.
And while farming is a gamble, farming on the river is a double gamble, because every few years the rain comes down in torrents and floods scour the bottomlands.
I think about a lot of the hard times my dad had on the river. I've heard him talk about some of the past floods, how it wiped out crops. I have seen, for instance, in 1972, in June of 72, when the river got out in just a very high flood, lost everything they had in the bottoms.
Mark Taylor is also concerned about houses that are being built on the Yadkin. The farmland is being divided up as developers move in. He says his children may never know the pleasure of farming this land.
In this particular area here, we see the houses being built. A lot of development going on here now. I do not know that the opportunity will be here when they finish college.
Forsyth County lost nearly a third of its farmland to developers in the 1970s, so the county launched the first farmland preservation program in the southeast, with a goal to save at least 30,000 acres of prime agricultural land. The land is permanently protected from development. Michael Washington helps administer the program.
It may be costly now, but when we look at it back in time, we may decide that this is a very economical thing we're doing instead of a very expensive project. Once agricultural land is lost to non-agricultural uses, the chances of it returning to agricultural, to whatever natural resource it is very limited.
No one can own the river, but private property rights along its banks should be respected. So about 20 public access points have been set aside for those who want to get on the river. Joe Matthews was instrumental in establishing this Yadkin River Trail system, which has become a model for the rest of the nation.
It's private land that's been leased to county or municipal governments. So the way it used to be, if somebody got on here canoe, they end up on somebody's private land, but now there's no reason for that.
Joe says he's seen the river from start to finish, and he says this section of islands and rocky outcrops near East Bend, where he lives, is the most beautiful.
I've never seen anything any prettier than here. One of the best things, I think, is to come early of the morning or late of the evening and just sit out here and be real quiet and see what type of animals are going to be out here.
The public can enjoy 2 miles of land on both sides of the river here in the Pilot Mountain State Park. And there's a 6-mile public hiking trail to the distinctive figure of Pilot Mountain nearby. The visitors, including the horseback riders and hikers, keep it clean, take care of the river and the surrounding trails.
The people who do come out here, they really get attached to this area, and they come back.
Few people visit this scenic area, but in a way, the river is touched by every person living in its watershed.
Anything that is dumped out are released into an environment in many parts of the Piedmont or in certain sections of the mountains is eventually going to wash off and go downhill. It will eventually get to the river.
As forests and fields are replaced with hard surfaces such as roofs, roads, and parking lots, rainwater doesn't soak into the ground, but washes off quickly. It often carries poisonous chemicals and metals such as mercury and lead to the river. These toxic materials may concentrate in certain plants and animals, including humans, causing serious damage. Other substances, such as fertilizers that are put on crops or lawns, can cause damage if too much of it washes into the river. It can lead to oxygen deficiencies that kill fish and other river creatures. Among the urban areas that depend on the Yadkin for drinking water, the largest is Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, with a population of about 200,000. And Barry Sheeran in the city's utilities department says he sees no problems down the road.
No, in fact, we use on an average of about 40 million gallons a day with a peak of about 64 million. And in fact, the low flow ever recorded in the river is somewhere around 250 million gallons per day, which is several times more than our peak flow.
And you could say that each of those people depending on the Yadkin for drinking water is a branch of the Yadkin. Biologists tell us that our bodies are about 2/3 water, so hundreds of thousands of people are literally composed of the Yadkin River. Some cities are seeing their economic growth jeopardized by an inadequate water supply for their industries and residents. That has touched off a debate about the need to draw from one water basin to supply the needs of water-deficient cities in smaller river basins.
I think right now there is not enough interbasin transfer within the Yadkin to cause anyone a problem. And if that water's taken out of the river basin and not brought back, then that affects our waste treatment as much as it does our water treatment industry.
By some estimates, the river is nearly 1/3 processed wastewater by the time it leaves North Carolina. Metropolitan users are urged to practice the golden rule in returning treated wastewater into the Yadkin.
That's correct. We feel like we hope that those above us are taking us into consideration as well as we try to take the people below us in consideration.
Winston-Salem also controls the rights to the top 30 feet of the water in the Carscott Reservoir upriver in Wilkes County, but the city has never had to request that any of the water be released. A dam that was built on the Yadkin in 1960 created this beautiful body of cool, clear water nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. It's a favorite spot for water skiers, boaters, and fishermen in the area. In fact, the water here is the cleanest of any of the lakes created as reservoirs or for flood control along the Yadkin River. The Piedmont Land Conservancy is trying to preserve significant natural areas along the Yadkin, working with property owners on protection strategies. Conservancy member Kathy Traynor says people need to know about the Yadkin Valley.
I would like them first to take a look at how beautiful it is. It's a spot that we can educate people from kindergartens to colleges and on. It's a learning laboratory that is living. To bring classes out into this kind of wooded area, natural area that's in a balance in nature is a wonderful experience.
The Yadkin River Basin is home to such animals as deer, bobcats, raccoons, foxes, turkeys, hawks, and eagles. It's the kind of natural area that makes a community healthy and unique.
Animals come from their homes to this area to eat, find a new home, find a mate, and the river provides the corridor through which they can travel. It gives them water. It gives them a means of transportation if it's an aquatic animal. There are lots of different ways that the river ties in a community. And healthy communities, ones that are balanced by nature, are very important to man because these trees help to filter the air from pollution. They shade the area, keep the temperature lower. They block sounds of other development.
Occasionally, a black bear will ignore the urban development and wander into the area, maybe even startling a homeowner by climbing up on a canoe in their backyard to get at the seeds in a bird feeder.
And I was looking out the window and he was looking in at me, and I think that we were probably only about, I'd say 15 feet apart. And then all of a sudden he just decided to get off the canoe and walk away into the night, and that was the last that I saw him.
Adrian Walshlaker is a member of the Yadkin River Commission, which was formed by 3 counties adjoining the river in a pioneering effort to protect the river for animals and humans alike.
I think the commission has gotten started at the right time before the river becomes polluted and becomes a problem. And so we can just work from this point on and maintain the good water quality that we do have today.
The Commission has won a national award for establishing a cooperative effort to protect the river. Some of those working with the Commission fear development threatens this peaceful river valley.
Yes, I do. I think that we'll find that as the Piedmont becomes more developed, more urbanized, that the Yadkin Valley will become much more of a magnet for new development. The irony is, of course, that the very serenity, the very peacefulness you're describing about the Yadkin Valley could be compromised as more development moves into that area.
Simmons says it's important to preserve green space and, where possible, encourage cluster housing and limited residential development as an alternative to the conventional subdivisions.
In many parts of the country, we're finding that that people are beginning to realize the economic value of their land based on what's not done to it. And that's kind of counter to the prevailing attitude where you try to squeeze as much off the property as possible. The real value is that land has value based on keeping some areas undeveloped. And particularly when you're looking at a scenic area like the Yadkin Valley, if you do stay off the steep slopes and do stay out of the floodplain and preserve some of the open qualities that make it special, then that in itself preserves the value of the land and makes it more attractive.
And I think a lot of us want to continue to keep this rural character alive, and we value this, our past, and we value, our future. And keeping it in agriculture and keeping this economic industry alive, I think, is essential to the Yadkin Valley.
The experts say it's important for everyone in the river basin to practice good stewardship. And remember, the river is now a tie that binds communities and people together, rather than just forming a boundary line between counties.
Rivers tend to be, hey, if it's everybody's property, then it's nobody's property, and areas will say, well, we can do anything we want out near the river. You're going to put a road through, put it out near the river. If you're going to dump something, put it out near the river, because everything goes downstream. Protecting the river in terms of its integrity, scenically and chemically in other ways, is going to be a big job.
But it is possible, with proper balance, cooperation between the developers, the farmers, the industries, and the hundreds of thousands of people who make this river basin.
That property owners recognize, first of all, the value of those natural systems, whether it be the animal communities or the scenic qualities of the area or what have you. And again, as more areas become developed, we're finding that those special qualities have value in their own right.
The Indians who settled these banks didn't divide the land for ownership. It was for use by all, but they knew it could be overused.
Well, certainly they were keenly aware that you can destroy the environment that you're dependent upon, either through too many people or too intensive a use of the land. They didn't have the technology to completely degrade the environment. They would simply begin to affect it before they were forced to move on.
We don't wade across it or go down to its banks for a drink of refreshing water now. But it's no less important to us than it was to those first Americans thousands of years ago.
It is vital that we protect it not only for ourselves, but for generations to come.
Up to now, the Yadkin has been a healthy, robust river, capable of handling everything we've thrown at it. And while it's known more as a working river than for its beauty, it is fragile and deserves our respect. The Yadkin is no individual's property, but it belongs to all of us. It is literally a part of us. It flows through our schools, our industries, our homes, our food supply, our bodies. It is our most valuable natural resource. We should do our part in this snapshot in time to make sure future generations can enjoy clear, clean, life-sustaining water.
areas become developed, we're finding that those special qualities have value in their own right.